Hello everybody, this is Yoko's Anime Reactions, and we are going to do part 2 for Volume 9. Oh great. Please don't tell me I have the hiccups. Whatever. The new orphans. The first thing we needed to do after taking the orphans into our care was bathe them. We had to scrub the boys and girls down in their respective buildings, then get them dressed in gray priest and shrine maiden robes before they could eat lunch. I turned my panda bus to its face stone form, then looked at my attendants. Nicola. Wash the girls in the girls' building. Gil, wash the boys in the boys' building. As for the soap in their clothes, they will be the same as the ones used in the temple and have already been prepared, Fran said, earning nods from Nicola and Gil. Noticing that the 4 orphans were stiff with anxiety, I gave them a warm smile. We can eat lunch once you're clean. You're all hungry, aren't you? The word lunch made the orphans swallow hard, and while they exchanged scared glances over being separated, they still went to their respective buildings to be washed. Ferdinand and I headed to the dining room, then took our seats at the furthest end of the table. These were the seats for nobles. The table no longer looked exceptionally miserable, thanks to Fran having covered it with a tablecloth, but that didn't change the fact that we were sitting on wooden boxes in front of a table made of boxes and a board. In the temple, blue robes ate first. Their attendance would only start once they were done, and the leftovers would be sent to the orphanage as divine gifts. This meant that nobody could start eating until we had finished. So we started lunch with Fran and a gray shrine maiden serving us. Daniel and Bridget were eating with us as fellow nobles, so we didn't have the time nor space here for the guards to eat separately. Rosamond, you have taught even gray shrine maidens to cook food such as this? Ferdinand asked with a frown. He was paying money for my recipes. It all began when only one chef remained in the temple over the winter, which demanded that we use apprentice gray shrine maidens as assistants in the kitchen. But once they had learned how to make tasty food, they would naturally continue making it when they returned to the orphanage. The techniques just spread from there. It wasn't as though I went out of my way to teach them, and the blue priests don't know about it simply because they have no interest in the orphanage. Ferdinand, being one such blue priest, twitched his cheek ever so slightly. So you have not only taught them letters and math, but how to cook as well. If other nobles were to learn of this, we will be swarmed with requests to buy them. My children are expensive, just so you know. They have lots of special abilities. Considering that they were served necessary roles in spreading the printing industry and furthering my education reform plan, it would take a lot for me to sell one of them, even if the nobles were interested. Plus, I know how to have the authority to turn those nobles down. You do. You do now have the authority to turn them down. You can tell them, hell no, I'm not selling my people to you. Heck no. The previous high bishop might have been willing to sell them all at the drop of the hat, but I was in the middle of training them for my master plan of spreading printing and building bookstores and libraries. I had no intention of letting them go so easily. What do you mean by education reform plans? Ferdinand demanded. I have heard of no such thing. If more people don't learn to read, there won't be more people to write books, will there? I replied. I have a grand plan to increase the literacy rate within the duchy, though I haven't ironed out all the details just yet. I had several ideas swirling around my head, but they all relied on printing being widely established in varying degrees. Ferdinand glared at me as I dabbed his mouth. Write a detailed report on your plan and deliver it to me when we return to the temple. What? But I just told you I haven't ironed out the details yet. You have a clear history of charging into matters before the details have been ironed out. Write a report, even if you are just presenting a vague idea of what you potentially hope to accomplish one day. Unable to argue back, I had to acquiesce and agree to write a report, all while glaring at Daniel and Fran, who were nodding in complete agreement with Ferdinand. Still, this turned out to be more troublesome than expected. What do you intend to do about him, Rosamond? Ferdinand asked with a sigh. Wait. Who are you talking about? I asked, blinking in confusion. That insignificant fool who is convinced that he has power to his name. Such small fry tend to harbor unjustified resentment toward those they themselves act against, and I expect his bitter attempts at revenge to be as tedious as they are obsessive, Ferdinand explained. I let out of my own sigh once I understood what he meant. He does resemble the previous high bishop, doesn't he? The way he tries to sell girls for money, mistakenly interprets the power of his distant backers as his own, does whatever he wants like he's the king of his own little world. I started listing out all the ways they resembled each other, earning a small chuckle from Ferdinand. Their backers' power is almost incomparable in scale, but they certainly are similar in the lowly way they scurry about. Though, in this case, since we don't know who his backers are, we don't know how much influence he has. How many people will we need to remove from power to eradicate it completely, and how will the city change once they're gone? Hopefully the changes will be good for the monastery. The High Bishop's power was largely constrained to the temple, so it had been easy for Ferdinand to fill the power vacuum when he was removed. For this reason, there hadn't been any problems to speak of, but now we were dealing with the mayor of a city that nobles never entered unless it was spring prayer or time for taxes. We could use our status as nobles to eliminate him, but who knew what would happen to the city once he was gone? Rosamond, time spent thinking about how to make things go either way is time wasted. The future is always an unknown. The best we can do is what we deem to be right. You say that, but don't you spend a lot of time thinking up plans to make things go the way you want them to? The gods help those who help themselves, Ferdinand replied. In other words, you could justify anything if you used the right phrasing. I glared at him and pursed my lips a little, but with an unfazed expression he murmured, There are few matters that can be settled through idealistic philosophies. His words carried a weight to them that made it hard to argue back, as he had lived in noble society where idealism didn't cut it before ultimately joining the temple for his own protection. Lady Rosamond, we have finished bathing them, Nicholas said, bringing Nora and Martha into the dining hall in their gray shrine maiden robes, just as delicious aroma started wafting through the air. The girls had been so dirty before that I hadn't been able to work out what color their hair was, but now it stood out against their gray robes and highlighted their pretty faces. Please state your names and ages, I said. Martha immediately hid behind Nora, who quickly turned around with an expression of motherly concern, her light purplish blue hair swirling through the air as she did. She patted Martha's head before turning back to me with the bright blue eyes and a smile. I'm Nora, and I'm 14. I'm really glad you came here when you did, since I was going to be sold as soon as I came of age. Thanks for taking us in, really, she said. I nodded and returned her smile, but Ferdinand's lips curved into a displeased frown. Such casual language. Ferdinand, please don't have unreasonable expectations of people who haven't been educated. Those in the lower city are even worse. All that matters is that they learn to speak properly moving forward, I said, trying to console him. It only made sense that there would be a big gap between the orphans raised in the temple and the orphans raised elsewhere. There were no blue priests in Haas, so nobody could chastise them for coarse language or improper behavior. Ehrenfest's lower city was right by the nobles' quarter, but a city without nobles had no reason to teach its kids how to interact with them. And what about you, girl hiding behind Nora, I asked, but Martha just fearfully shook her dark green hair and kept hiding. Her name is Martha, and... Let me stop you there, Nora. This child must answer on her own. Her being shy or nervous around strangers might have been acceptable up until now, but if a noble were to visit, and she were to refuse to answer her question, that would be seen as defiance, and defying a noble leads to immediate execution. That much is common sense in the temple. No way. Nora looked around in a daze, only to see Ferdinand, his brow furrowed in displeasure at her tone, and my two guard knights who were visibly frustrated with how her and Martha were conducting themselves. But were keeping silent as I was speaking. Fran and Nicola had already started eating, so there would be no one to defend her, and Martha's improper behavior towards nobles. I have spent time with lower city commoners, and thus understand how you two feel very well, but as a noble myself, I cannot allow this to continue. Commoners must display absolute obedience to nobles. You two will die if you do not understand this fact. Now tell me your name and age. As I was focused my gaze on Martha, I couldn't help thinking, I swear, I sure am the bad guy here. Martha was immediately pushed forward by Nora, and tears welled up in her eyes as she choked out a response. I'm Martha, 8 years old. Very well done. I know that it will be hard for you to adapt to an entirely different way of life here, but nobody will sell you, and you will have food each day. I ask that you both dedicate yourselves to adapting quickly, knowing that you will be cared for in return. Okay, they both replied, but no sooner had I let out a sigh of relief at their understanding than Thor and Rick angrily started charging at me. What are you planning to do to Martha and my sister? Stop, I will not be doing anything to them, I said, but they continued charging this way before they could get much closer, though. Daniel and Bridget knocked them both back with light smacks. Light smacks. The two boys immediately fell backward, slamming into the boxes being used as chairs. Thor, Rick, Nora cried, to think that you would charge at a noble. There is courage, and then there is foolishness. Were I any other noble, you two would be dead right now, I said. They had acted so recklessly because they hadn't grown up around any nobles. That was dangerous. At this rate, they could end up dying in the blink of an eye. Listen well, you two. It is crucial to be patient and calm when dealing with nobles, even when they do things you don't like. There is a world of difference between defying the mayor, who is a fellow commoner, and defying a noble. He will merely beat you, but a noble will kill you where you stand without listening to a word of protest, I explained. The 4 orphans paled at the sight of my 2 guards, who were protectively standing in front of me with their weapons now drawn. I imagine that you heard me ask this of Nora and Martha, I continued, but I will repeat myself. Please state your names and ages. I'm Thora, and I'm 11, Thor said, protectively standing in front of Nora and fixing me with a glare as he answered. Oh, so Nora is his sister. Okay. He looked a lot like his sister, his eyes just as blue as hers, and his hair was a similar color. It wasn't hard to imagine that he had protected Nora from the countless men who had no doubt targeted her for her looks. I found his heroism and love for her admirable, and hoped that he wouldn't let anyone take that from him. Though he'd need to learn to keep it down and not let his heroism tick off my guards in attendance. My name's Rick. I'm 12 and I'm Martha's older brother. Oh, okay, I get it. He and Martha likewise had similar hair and eye color, dark green and gray, respectfully. Other than that, though, they looked pretty different. Rick had thick eyebrows and sharp facial features, while Martha had cute features that seemed to reflect her shy, reserved personality. They probably resembled their parents, but whatever. I am Rosemine. Just recently I was baptized and made the High Bishop of Arenfest. It is nice to meet you all. Now we will postpone taking you to your room so that you can eat lunch first. Gil, you may begin eating. You have done a good job today. Fran stood up from his seat, having finished, and Gil took his place. Grey Shrine Maidens then brought Gil some food, which he speedily started to work his way through. Once he was done, the Grey Priest began to eat. There was plenty to go around since we hadn't brought many orphans back with us. When the heck are we going to get to eat? Thor exclaimed. I'm hungry, Martha murmured. I felt bad for the 4 orphans and their rumbling tummies. But they had to get used to how things worked in the temple. Gil, please tell them the order in which we from the temple eat our food, I said, leaving the explanation to him since he knew the most about commoners and all my attendants. He nodded and began to speak. Food in the temple is referred to as divine gifts. The noble blue priests eat first, followed by their attendants. The leftovers are then brought to the orphanage where there is also an eating order. First, the adult priests and shrine maidens eat, then the apprentices, and then finally the children who haven't been baptized. You are all old enough to be apprentices, so for now you may now rest easy knowing that you will be eating together, I added. When it came time for the apprentices to eat, food was placed in front of the 4 orphans. They would be serving themselves under normal circumstances, but since we had no idea what they would do, we decided to serve them first so that they could see what was expected of them. Not yet, I'm afraid. You must first pray in appreciation to the gods. I stopped the 4 orphans, all of whom had started chomping down on their food, and made them repeat the prayer after me. As it was a fundamental part of life in the temple, it was something they had to get used to. I, too, had walked the same path before. Once that was done, they got to work silently devouring the food, each with gleaming eyes. It was clear from the way they grabbed it with their hands and shoved it into their mouths that they had lived life without ever encountering the word etiquette. Everyone but me was looking at them with shock. Ferdinand didn't even try to hide the disgust on his face. It reminded me of how repulsed I had been when I first came to this world and saw my neighbors eating around the well. They are surely starving. I know this is not a pleasant sight for you, but this is how all untrained people eat. We have no choice but to teach them the proper way slowly over time. If nothing else, this will help us all appreciate the importance of education and how above average the children in the temple truly are, and the orphanage truly are. Indeed, and to speak frankly, I did not expect them to be this boorish. The only commoners I know are those in the Gilberta Company, Ferdinand murmured. I let out a sigh. It wasn't fair to compare them with the Gilberta Company. This was standard for poor people. The orphans asked for seconds, thirds, and even fourths. When the time came to take them to their rooms, they each had their hands on their swollen bellies and satisfied grins on their faces. Since we were in the dining hall, we headed to the girls' building first. Boys weren't normally allowed in, but I had decided it'd be wise to show them the rooms just this once so they could see that everyone was being treated equally. We climbed the stairs and opened the door to the right. This is where the apprentices will sleep. Adult shrine maidens have their own rooms further down the hall, but apprentices share rooms with each other. This room's so big we can all sleep together, Thor said with a grin, but I shook my head. I'm afraid that you won't all be sleeping in the same room. Why not? He exclaimed as he and Rick stepped forward to protect their sisters. My guards and attendants immediately assumed their own defensive stances in response, so I raised a hand to stop them. Boys are forbidden from entering the girls' building. They are only allowed to go to the dining room. You would normally not be allowed in here, but we brought you here today so you can see for yourself that the girls are being treated equally. Thor's blue eyes flashed with rage. But we're siblings. I know, but that is irrelevant. This is the girls' building. Even their male family members cannot enter, I explained. It was easy to imagine that they had spent their lives fighting to stay together and find a home for themselves, and while denying them that made my heart ache, I had no choice. 2 other Grey Shrine Maidens, Thor and Rick, are not family. They are strangers and men like any other. Just as you wish to protect Nora, Thor, I wish to protect my Grey Shrine Maidens. Thor and Rick would never do anything bad to girls, Nora said, her light purple hair swaying as she shook her head. I continued my explanation, desperately hoping they would be able to see things from my perspective. I understand that. My Grey Priest would never do anything bad to girls either, but my word is not enough for you to believe that, is it, Nora? Nora inhaled deeply, lowering her eyes before once again shaking her head. I can understand that Thor and Rick wanted to protect their sisters, but I couldn't allow men into the girls' building. If you insist on staying together, you will need to sleep in the corner of the dining hall, I said. That'll work. Let's make our own room in the dining hall, Thor said in a cheery voice, but Nora and Martha looked at me with worry. Their eyes asked whether they really could make a room there, and I shook my head. I will only be lending you space to sleep. The dining hall can be entered by all, so other men have free access to the space as well. It's not your personal area, and others would not be forbidden from entering your sleeping space. My repeated rejections must have finally touched a nerve, as Thor's eyebrows shot up in surprise and his face twisted in anger. A dining hall's that freaking big. What's the problem with us making our own room there, he roared. Don't you know how much it hurts to be taken away from your family? No, she does. She knows. I clutched my chest, and that was when I heard a loud, painful-sounding slap. Ouch. Fran had smacked Thor across the face. Fran, who had been raised in the orphanage and taught from birth that violence was wrong under any circumstances. I looked up at him wide-eyed. Fran? I whispered. His dark brown eyes were filled with anger as he looked down at the boy coldly, dropping the temperature of the room just like Ferdinand did when he was angry. Oh. Whoa. Everyone was shocked. There is no one in the world who knows that feeling more than Lady Rosemine, Fran said, the fury in his eyes not easing for even a moment as he took a step forward. Thor took a step back in response, clearly intimidated. The heck? He murmured. Fran took another step forward. Lady Rosemine's talents led to her being separated from her family at her baptism, and instead becoming the Archduke's adopted daughter. On top of that, she has been assigned the position of High Bishop, which requires her to continuously move between the castle and the temple while suffering the sorrow of being unable to see her family. Yeah, she knows more than anybody else how that feels. So yeah, shut up. The four kids opened their eyes wide in shock, then all looked at me in unison. Fran shifted to the side a bit so as to protect me from their gazes. Lady Rosemine saved your sister from being sold, and although you will be sleeping in separate rooms, you will be permitted to live in the same orphanage, all thanks to her. She may forgive your ungracious rudeness, but as her head attendant, I will not. Oh no, Fran's patience has finally run out. Fran hadn't gotten angry like this when he scolded me for being soft on Delia, or when I had gotten too close with Gil. He served me well, but I knew that Ferdinand was still above me in his mind, so I hadn't expected him to get this angry over the orphans being rude to me. Wow. That's surprising. The sight of this terrified Thor was enough to make me hurriedly stop Fran. That'll be enough, Fran. They have learned their lesson, I said, stepping between them. But Lady Rosemine, Fran replied, angry enough that he tried to take yet another step forward. I understand that you are angry for my sake. Thank you. Your hand hurts, does it not? I asked. It was my fault that Fran had been forced to resort to violence when heretofore he had managed to avoid it. I just wasn't a good enough noble yet. I grabbed his sleeve to stop him and clasped my hands around his reddened palm. His gaze moved down to his hand, at which point I looked over to Thor, who was holding a hand against his struck cheek, and Rick, who had stepped forward to protect the others. Listen well, Thor, Rick. I understand painfully well your desire to protect your families. I also understand that you are feeling anxious and uneasy here, in a world where everything runs on rules different from the ones you are used to. Throughout my life, I had experienced a vast number of worlds with clashing rules and philosophies. The contrast between Earth and this world, commoners and nobles, craftsmen and merchants, the lower city and the temple and the nobles' quarter, and so on. I know exactly how nerve-wracking it was to enter a new world and how hard it was to live with when its values clashed with your own. But you aren't alone, are you? I continued. You may not be able to sleep in the same room, but you will still be living together. Nora and Martha will never be sold. Thor raised his head and slowly blinked his blue eyes, seeming to understand for the first time that my words were well and true. You can sleep in the dining hall if you absolutely insist, but I think that Nora and Martha would rest easier in the girls' building where men are forbidden from going there than in the dining hall where anybody can enter. Am I right? I asked. Thor was doing everything he could to protect his sister, but he hadn't actually asked Nora or Martha what they thought. I looked their way and Nora immediately cast her eyes down, her long eyelashes pointing toward the floor. Thor, please go to the boys' building. We will sleep in the girls' building. Nora? I don't want to sleep in the dining hall. I won't be able to relax with men I don't know walking around. It's been so long since I've been able to sleep easy. Please understand, Thor. All it took was one look at Nora's faint smile to know how exhausted she was, and how many years she had spent living in uneasy fear. Hearing her words, Thor bit his lip in frustration. Me too, Rick. I want to sleep with Nora, Martha said, desperately pulling on her brother's sleeve. It must have been rare for her to be so forward about her opinions as Rick's eyes shot open wide in surprise as he looked down at her. Are you sure you'll be fine? Uh-huh. It's not scary here, Martha said, giving Rick a small smile as she removed her hand from his sleeve. Now that both her and Nora had expressed their desire to sleep in the girls' building, Thor and Rick had no choice but to concede, because they're not going to go against their sisters on this one. They're doing all they can to protect them. They wouldn't go against them if that's what they want. Now then, I will continue the tour, I began, thinking that everything had been peacefully settled. But just as I was about to head toward the staircase, Fran raised a hand to stop me. First, apologize, he said to Thor. What? I asked in surprise. Lady Rosemine is the High Bishop. I demand that you apologize for behaving so rudely to the High Bishop, Fran continued. What? He's still mad? Well, duh. They would have to apologize. They're commoners. You're the High Bishop. Of course they would have to apologize. They're lucky you're not the other noble, or else they would have been killed. It seemed that Fran's quiet anger was especially persistent. I personally just wanted to let bygones be bygones, but his expression and behavior made it clear that he wouldn't let Thor off so easily. It was the first time I had seen him like this, and it was beyond me to stop him. I'm surprised that Ferdinand hasn't said anything. It seemed I wasn't the only one unsettled by Fran's anger, as Nora immediately sucked in a breath and forced Thor's head down. Then, once she had her little brother on his knees, she knelt down as well and faced me to apologize. I'm sorry. Come on, there, apologize. Come on, Thor, apologize. I'm sorry. Okay, they apologized. Isn't that good enough? I silently pleaded, looking up at Fran. Our eyes met and he gave a small smile, but it wasn't his usual peaceful smile. Instead, it was like an ice-cold smile that lacked any trace of warmth. Lady Rosemine, I suggest that we leave the tour to Gil and Nicola. Fran? I would like to discuss this matter in more detail. Gil, Nicola, please take them away, Fran ordered. Gil and Nicola stammered out words of agreement, then raced down the stairs with the 4 orphans so quickly that they were practically fleeing from him. Wait, no, don't leave me behind! I cried out on the inside. Oh no, now you're going to have to deal with this. How are you going to calm him down? But Fran's coldness seemed to propel them forward, and they were gone in the blink of an eye. They're scared of him now! Of course! None of you have seen Fran like that. Now it's just Fran, my 2 guards, Ferdinand. Why didn't Ferdinand say anything? I'm surprised that he even was surprised at this. As you might expect, Ferdinand was wearing a smile that was just as frosty as Fran's, and I immediately broke out in a cold sweat. Uh-oh. Uh-oh! What is gonna happen? Now then, Lady Rosemine, let us discuss this matter in your room, Fran said. Indeed, Ferdinand agreed. It seems we have much to teach her. Okay, I squeaked. These 2 are way too similar. It's honestly terrifying. Somebody help me! But nobody came. It was at times like this I wanted the protection the most, but my 2 guards wouldn't even look me in the eye. Oh dear, what is going to happen? The orphans' treatment and investigating the city. Fran would never go anywhere near the orphanage director's hidden room back at the temple, perhaps due to this place being different, or the anger that was consuming him. He went into the monastery's hidden room without an ounce of hesitation. Once there, he spoke immediately and with a severe expression. You must not permit the orphans to be rude to you. You are already looked down upon for your youth, and if you permit rudeness, then they will only move to exploit you further. He said, at which point my 2 guards raised their chins slightly in subtle agreement. What I fear most is you permitting their rudeness, encouraging their arrogance, and then ultimately being displeased by what they proceed to do. Indeed, it is especially a concern because you entirely lose control of your mana when angry. There's always much collateral damage, Ferdinand added. I hung my head, unable to argue back. My intention had been to be kind to them as they were newcomers, but apparently that wasn't a good idea at all. All things demand care and caution at first. Kindness is a virtue after all, but do not conflate kindness with being soft and weak. I'll be more careful, I said. I meant it too. I didn't want to keep forcing Fran to strike others, nor did I want both him and Ferdinand to get so angry at me again. Rosemine, hardening your soft nature is a significant concern, but our priority should no doubt be training those orphans. What in the world was with that crude manner of speech? And I could hardly stand to watch them eat, Ferdinand said, his brow wrinkled as he thought back to lunch. These kids have had no training. They were just living in the orphanage. Who knows what they were being forced to do by that mayor? They have had no kind of education, no nothing. This is how they do things. They're lucky they can even speak. If they didn't have anybody treating them well, they would act like animals. Well, they kind of ate like animals, but whatever. People ain't like that all the time in the lower city, but I couldn't just ask Ferdinand to understand that and let the matter go. The orphans had entered the temple, so they needed to learn basic etiquette. I have no idea where to begin with such poor creatures, so I would hope you have some plan for them. How does the Gilberta Company handle commoners? Ferdinand asked. But the Gilberta Company was one of the richest stores in the lower city, and generally only took on apprentices from stores that already had experience doing business with nobles. Lutz had been on the same level as the orphans when Meadow hired him. But he was smart, a fast learner, and very dedicated to improving. It wouldn't be fair on the orphans to compare them to him. Fran suddenly looked up as though he had realized something. Given that there are only 4 of them, perhaps it would be best to take them back to the temple, he suggested. His reasoning was that they would learn better at the temple's orphanage, that was where the other kids were being taught. That would no doubt provide them with a good learning environment, but it would just stress them out if we took them there before they were better used to this way of life. When I had first gone to the temple, I had agonized over how different the culture there was, but I had a home to return to. I had less of my family there for comfort. I could complain that nothing made sense and they would agree. Which was incredibly important. They would have nowhere to escape to if we moved them to the temple now, and with their entire family feeling the same stress for the same reason. It was hard to guess how much comfort they would be able to find in each other. I suggest we wait a bit longer before taking them to the temple. It will be ideal for them to learn the ways on familiar ground first. At this rate, they are bound to experience much conflict at the temple, and it would be best to give them the opportunity to return to the mayor should they find adjusting impossible. Lady Rosemine? Fran looked visibly confused, having not once in his life thought about leaving the temple. We still don't know whether they will adjust to the temple's way of life, do we? The girls might wish to stay here to avoid being sold, but it is possible that the boys would prefer the freedom granted to them by the mayor, I explained. The most freedom this orphanage offered was letting everyone go to the forest to gather and make paper. So I can imagine the mayor giving them more than that would play a big part in whatever decision they end up making. I suggest we wait for the harvest festival to end. If they all decide to stay, we can take them to the temple for the winter. By that time, they will no doubt have adjusted to life here. In that case, how shall we train them? Fran asked. Putting aside the young one, it is rare for children that old to enter the temple and I have no experience training them. In the lower city, kids generally got jobs as soon as they were baptized. They worked as apprentices, and those whose parents died would become live-in apprentices, with the store then looking after them. While it wasn't unusual for pre-baptism kids to be sent to the orphanage, when they had no family to take them in, it was extremely rare for this to happen to children old enough to be apprentices. Do the children here not take on apprentice work, I asked? For those whose parents are farmers, their fields would be requisitioned the moment both parents die. I imagine that underage children would not be able to grow enough to eat on the amount of land given to them, though I must confess that I do not know the details. Ferdinand said with a light sigh. He had looked over related tax documents before, but since he had never actually observed the life of a farmer, he wasn't entirely sure what happened to the orphans. Then I suppose we have no choice but to start from the beginning and teach them like we would teach any new children. And by that you mean... I imagine that every aspect of life here will be drastically different from what they're used to. Even something as simple as how food is served, I explained. In many ways, the temple follows the same rules as a noble's mansion. We will have to begin by carefully teaching them how to use cutlery. It was common in the lower city to just eat with your hands, so much so that the temple's orphanage was considered the odd one for teaching kids to use cutlery. From that point, we will need to teach them to clean, I continued. Let's give high praise to the priest for how quick, efficient, and thorough their cleaning was. And I imagine that cleaning skills these orphans learned under the mayor will not suffice in the temple. From what I can remember, Les had mentioned being taught to clean by Gil, and then passing the techniques on to the other apprentices in the Gilberta Company. However, please be sure to always teach them together as a group. Ensure this is done when taking them to the forest together, when making paper, and when cooking. They should learn together, not separately. And why is that? Ferdinand asked, presumably having been planning to assign an individual tutor to each orphan since there were only 4 of them, and we had a total of 6 priests and shrine maidens. They will learn faster if they're together. Groups will breed competition, and they will be able to teach each other as well. You mustn't look down on the power of groups, I said, using the kids competing over Carta as an example. Ferdinand blinked, then murmured, so it is similar to how the Royal Academy encourages growth, before looking at me with an unsettling smile. I got the feeling that he had started cooking up some kind of weird plot. That was probably just my imagination. I think he is planning something. I don't know what the heck he's planning. But, yeah. In any case, I say we focus on helping them adjust to life here for the time being. Please never forget how difficult and time-consuming it is for outsiders to adjust to the temple's way of life. Teach them slowly and with great patience. Understood. I will convey this information to the priest, Fran said, now back to wearing his usual peaceful expression. Thank God he calmed down. That was scary. Now then, with that settled, let us return to the temple and investigate Haas a bit more, Ferdinand said. What? But we've already done an investigation, I replied. We already had scholars at the Gilberta Company look the place over and inform us of their findings, but Ferdinand just tapped his temple with his pointer finger while looking at me. You fool! Their investigation was centered around making a workshop here, so most of the information they gathered was about the population, geography, and businesses. These are all irrelevant to what I'm talking about. What we are going to investigate is which nobles are backing the mayor, how much power and influence he has accumulated, how many of his associates we will need to eliminate if we take action against him, and how we are going to fill the power vacuum afterward. This is entirely separate from investigating the best location for a workshop. It seems that Dark Ferdinand had appeared and was more than ready to operate in the shadows. But, well, I would just leave that to him. I wasn't really suited to deception and trickery. My head was better used in other places. I exited the room once our conversation was over to find Gil and Nicola looking this way, their faces clouded with worry. I smiled to show them that everything was okay, and their expressions brightened in relief. The 4 orphans looked equally concerned and then equally relieved when they saw that Fran was calm again. We will visit again 5 days from now, I said to the Grey Priest. In the meantime, we will investigate the mayor to see which nobles he is connected to and how much influence he has. We shall ask Benno and Gustav to take care of any food matters, so I ask that you try not to leave the monastery if you can help it. Take care not just of the new orphans we have welcomed, but yourselves as well. They knelt down and replied, as you wish. By that point, the 4 orphans were kneeling in the same way as well. The monastery has magic protecting it, so you will be safe as long as you stay inside, even if the mayor comes. But we can offer no such protection if you leave, so be careful, I warned. The 4 orphans nodded with worried looks on their faces, each knowing the mayor well. Ferdinand summoned Benno the second we got back to the temple. He wanted to get as many details as he could about Haas and its mayor. Thankfully, Benno managed to arrive at the temple in the blink of an eye, entirely as if he had been expecting the summons. We went and acquired the orphans. Our reception was less than stellar, and you expected that, did you not, Benno? Oh, yes, the mayor's reception was always less than stellar. Its behavior, if you will only ever see in Haas, Benno said with a grin. It seemed that he had intentionally not told the mayor that the high bishop and high priest would be the ones going to fetch the orphans. So he had been waiting for us to summon him ever since we left. According to Benno, the city of Haas was abnormal in how unusually powerful the mayor was. It was so close to Ehrenfest that nobles on long journeys would pass it by and stay the night at Dinkel instead, so they could only ever visit it for the spring prayer and harvest festival. Those who were traveling on foot might stop in Haas, but most nobles simply did not. Furthermore, Haas was close enough to Ehrenfest that merchants were less valuable than they would be in other cities. This was because people could just go to Ehrenfest market if they wanted goods, or do trade with the traveling merchants who always passed through Haas on their way to Ehrenfest. On top of all that, Haas has a winter mansion. Spring prayer and the harvest festival were held in Haas, and people from neighboring farming towns gathered there for the winter. The mayor had control over how all these people were accommodated, and so he had a considerable amount of influence across the region. Nobles can leave Ehrenfest without passing through the gates by using high beasts, Benno said. I do not know which particular nobles the mayor has convenient connections with, but I have heard they are high-ranking. High-ranking ones, I see. The only ones we know for sure was the former high bishop. Him again? I asked, exhausted. It honestly sucked that I had to deal with the old high bishop now that he was dead than I did when I was living in the temple and doing my best to avoid him. The former high bishop did not have a high beast and could only travel by carriage, making it more likely for him to stay at Haas, and he no doubt used his status as the Archduke's uncle to do whatever he wished. The mayor's defiance of you and I, the new high bishop and the high priest, makes that more than clear. He likely determined that no matter what happened, he could just call on the former high bishop for help. Ferdinand said, adding that since he hadn't seen me as a blue shrine maiden back during spring prayer, he had likely assumed we had been sent by the former high bishop. Some people also apparently looked down on Ferdinand, thinking he was a leech borrowing the high bishop's power like the other blue priests were. I imagine then that the mayor has no idea whatsoever that the previous high bishop was arrested. Benno, how much does the lower city know about the previous high bishop? Ferdinand asked. Nothing at all, Benno replied instantly, which made Ferdinand's eyes widen. He then furrowed his brow in a frown for a moment as he searched for words. Surely that is an exaggeration. After all, a new high bishop appeared. They must know something. Rumors of the new high bishop being the Archduke's adopted young daughter have spread, as well as rumors of her being a saint who can give real blessings. But there has been no talk whatsoever of the former high bishop. I imagine that people either assume he retired due to old age, or simply changed profession. Apparently, the legend of Rosemine the Saint really was spreading through the city. I had heard ahead of time that it would be necessary to fully justify my assignment to the role of high bishop, but honestly, it was so embarrassing that I could barely stand it. I am fairly suspicious that the scholars I accompanied have connections to the mayor as well. It seems that they engaged in some kind of secret discussion once my associate and I left his estate, Benno said, telling us everything he knew. Ferdinand began to think once over everything he had learned. His brow was firmly knitted, and I silently watched as he tapped his temple. Only after several minutes of deep thought did he finally let out a murmur. A thorn in my side, even after death, I see. Okay, let's see. How much have I recorded so far? I'll keep going. The monastery's barrier. Wilma, does the temple orphanage have enough resources to house more people over the winter? I asked, referring to those in Haas's orphanage. In response, Wilbur retraced some documents from last year and started flipping through them. Our winter preparation will need to be more extensive than they were last year, but we should have enough rooms. All we lack is bedding, tableware, and eating utensils. There was no issue accommodating the 3 priests and 3 shrine maidens as they had initially come from Ehrenfest's orphanage. 3? Never mind. But according to Wilma, we didn't have everything we needed for the 4 newcomers, that is, Nora and the others. This would be the only winter they spent in the temple since they were only being brought here for their education, and with that in mind, it would be more efficient to just bring what they needed from Haas than buy entirely new things. See, I don't have an exact number for you, but please make plans under the assumption that there will be 10 more people living here over the winter. There shouldn't be any issues since we have more time and money than we need this year, all thanks to you, Wilma, I might add. My one regret is that the High Priest forbade us from ever doing it again. The sales from Ferdinand's charity concert had really plumped up our wallets this year. They were essentially bursting at the seams and was all thanks to Wilma's illustrations completely selling out. We couldn't waste any of the money since we needed it to build orphanages and workshops in other cities. But repairing the temple orphanage for winter was a good cause too. Incidentally, how are the illustrations of the summer subordinate gods going? Are they nearly finished? Yes, most of them are done. There's still one more I need to complete, but I believe they started printing the ones I already finished today, Wilma explained. Gil had mentioned that they finished printing the text, but apparently they had now started the printing the art as well. They would probably be putting the books together in just a few days' time. Tell me, Wilma, do you think we can make picture books for the autumn and winter subordinate gods before the time comes for winter socializing? That would be somewhat difficult. With all the winter preparations, there simply isn't enough time. Rich people and nobles are the primary demographic for picture books, so having those series done before winter socializing would have led to a boost in sales. But if it wasn't feasible, then that was that. We would just have to be ready for next year instead. Lady Rosemont, what should we do as winter handiwork? Should we make toys as well as we did last year? Yes, everyone should be capable of woodwork like that. I believe it will be a few more years before playing cards and reversi begins to sell en masse, so we should build up stores of as many as we can in the meantime. That way, we could sell them at the peak of demand and before any imitations arrive on the market. Then think of other products to make. All the makeable things I can remember were simple to design, so I had no doubt they'd be copied in no time. Our best bet was to accept that copycats would appear and focus on selling new products instead. I see that you have your hands full making money even now that you're the High Bishop, Lady Rosemont. Okay, fair observation. But to be clear, and to protect the honor of my noble parents, I was being given more than enough money to live comfortably, unlike before when I had to earn my own money to survive as an apprentice Blue Shrine Maiden. I was plotting to make money here for the orphanage's sake, and to spread printing for my books. The orphanage must earn enough money to cover its operating costs. If you rely on funding from nobles, you will be back at square one the moment the funding disappears. My duty as High Bishop is to ensure that the orphanage will continue to function with or without me. I am ever so pleased to hear such comforting words, Lady Rosemont. And so, it seems the orphanage will be able to accommodate everyone. But there is one thing I wanted to ask about, I said to Ferdinand, having just reported what I had discussed with Wilma. High Priest, would it be acceptable for me to sell picture book Bibles in the castle? Hold on. Where exactly in the castle do you intend to sell them? Ferdinand asked, his bright golden eyes hardening a little as he glared at me. He was a teensy bit more sensitive about me selling things ever since I had sold illustrations of him without permission. Yeah, he's still gonna hold a grudge on that. Nowhere. I'm just asking whether I can. In the lower city, only rich people like merchants can read and buy picture books, but everyone is a potential customer when it comes to nobles. I think it would be nice to sell them to nobles with children during winter socializing, I explained. Ferdinand tapped his temples. I suppose that is better than you selling strange illustrations, he murmured before promising to get me permission to sell them in the castle at the end of winter. You may sell them as parting gifts to nobles leaving for their provinces. During the winter you will first draw the attention of the children using the Karata and the book about the primary gods. That way, when it comes time to leave, no parent will be able to refuse a new picture book, especially given that yours are exceptionally cheap for what they contain. Never in my life did I think Ferdinand would give me a business advice like that. That said, it will be a tough sell unless their children have become interested in reading by that time. The price is reasonable if they think it will be useful to their studies, but otherwise it will seem a bit high. Children come to winter socializings as well, I asked. The answer was probably yes, given that he had mentioned drawing their attention with Karata and the picture books. My plan had been to shill the latter to the parents, but things could get a lot more smoothly with kids around. Those who have been baptized do. It becomes an opportunity for them to learn culture at a young age, as well as a place to be taught the noble hierarchy. As for you, winter socializing is where you will search for and mature and nurture your future retainers. I don't want to deal with all that. It sounds like it's going to be a huge pain in the neck. I won't be able to spend... Where did I end off? I won't be able to spend all my time working on picture books then, I guess. Looks like I have a busy winter ahead of me. That was when I remembered what I had spent the previous winter doing. Wait, doesn't the temple have the dedication ritual over the winter? Surely I won't have time to be involved in socializing. You will have time and you will participate in both. I do so every year. Ferdinand, in all his supreme competence, apparently commuted between the castle and temple each year. But expecting the same from me in all of my supreme incompetence was a bit much, especially considering my ill health. Fran had a full understanding of my health, but even with him keeping his eyes on me at all times, I still had ended up getting forced to drink potions time and time again. I went last commuting between the castle and the temple. Ferdinand, I think I might die this winter. Fear not, I won't let you die that easily. There will be potions ready for you, he replied. It seemed that he was willing to brew potions for me, but not less than my workload. Talk about mean. At least don't make them too bitter, I requested. Ferdinand frowned, no doubt considering how many potions he used to brew, and that was when I felt goosebumps rise all over my arms. Eep! It wasn't like I was cold or anything. A sudden gross shudder had run down my spine, and a sickening sensation washed over me as thoughts of Haas Monastery flashed in my mind out of nowhere. Ferdinand, something weird just happened, I said, looking toward him for an explanation. He stood up looking like he had noticed something. It seems that someone has tried to enter Haas's monastery. I sense a slight disturbance in the protection field surrounding it. I imagine you can feel it as well, since you added your mana to the protection magic, Ferdinand explained. It seemed that we could both sense people attacking the monastery, him because he had built it with creation magic, and me because I had poured my mana into the protection face stone. Come with me, Rosemine, Ferdinand said as he headed to the hidden room beside his bed. I was a bit confused by his response. If people were attacking Haas's monastery, surely it makes sense to go there as soon as possible. Ferdinand, are we not going to Haas? I did not feel any significant interference. It would be wiser to investigate matters first, I said as he opened the door. I rushed in after him. This was my first time entering his hidden room in ages, that is, excluding all the times I'd come here to be lectured. Ferdinand picked out an octagonal bowl made of dark wood from among a mess of tools on one table, then set it down on a shorter, much less cluttered table. The bowl had a yellow face stone at each of its corners, and the intricate designs carved into the wood made it clear that this was a magic tool. He placed a hand over one of the face stones and poured mana into it, causing yellow light to stream through the carvings. The light split in two directions, moving around either side of the bowl and gradually connecting its face stones while the design's patterns emerged to form a complete magic circle, standing out against the dark background. A second later, liquid started rising up from the bottom of the bowl, filling it steadily. Ferdinand took out his staff and said, Spiegeln. I don't know, guys. Let me know, please. Spiegeln, whatever, before tapping the water, which made an image rise onto its surface. It was of Haas's monastery. I stood up and peered into the bowl rather than sitting on the bench like usual. This magic tool was entirely like a security camera. Ferdinand, can this thing you see everywhere? If only. It can only see buildings with protection face stones containing the user's mana. In general, the Archducal family uses it to protect their cities and the duchy. It's not an all-purpose spying tool. I wish. I had assumed it could also be used for weirdo peeping, but apparently I was wrong. Thank God for that. You don't think Ferdinand would do that anyway. I sighed in relief, which immediately earned me a threatening smile from Ferdinand. What in the heck were you thinking, he asked. Oh, nothing at all. I think what's happening at the monastery is a lot more important right now. In the picture, we could see a group of around 10 men armed with farming tools trying to force their way into the monastery. They had probably been ordered to do so by the mayor, though he was nowhere to be seen. The men were all pretty young, and the realization that they had come to take Nora and the others back made me shiver in fear. Ferdinand, we must go and help the orphans at once. There will be no need for that. I see no nobles among them, just observe, he replied. The men aggressively grasped at the door with the intent to force it open, only to then pull their arms back with surprised expressions. They tried over and over again with the same result, each time making them look entirely like cats swiping at a toy. It was hard to even see them as attackers. What in the world are they doing, I asked. The barrier around the monastery has been strengthened to not allow those with ill intent inside. They no doubt experience blinding pain each time they touch the door. Trying again will not change this, but it seems they are slow on the uptake. I watched the image, all the while thinking that being able to change the security level at will made the barrier a lot more convenient than expected. Ferdinand took that time to teach me a bit about creation magic. The reason I built the monastery instead of Sylvester was so we could strengthen this barrier without the one around Ehrenfest being affected. Had the Archduke made the monastery, the barriers around both it and the city would have been strengthened together. It is not hard to imagine all the issues this would have brought about. The barrier around Ehrenfest was apparently set to block magic attacks, while the one around the monastery had been strengthened to block those with ill intent. Ehrenfest having the same barrier would no doubt lead to problems like kids getting into fights with their parents, leaving the city to gather in the forest, and then not being able to get back in. That makes sense. You could laugh off being locked out of your house after a fight, but not being able to get back in the city at all would be pretty serious, I said. A smile crept onto my face as I pictured Dad pacing at the gate after an argument, able to do his job but unable to come back home. But that smile didn't last. And now they're swinging their farm tools. Finally understanding that the doors couldn't be opened by hand, the men raised their farming tools and swung down at them as hard as they could. In an instant, every single man was thrown back, and they ended up strewn across the ground in misshapen piles. It resembles the shield of wind you made to protect the carriage during spring prayer, does it not? The monastery's barrier is made in a similar fashion. That shield did a perfect job protecting Fran and Rosina. I'll trust a wind shield any day. The men looked shocked at having been knocked back, but still tried charging again. The results were as you would expect. No matter how many times they tried, they couldn't even scratch the monastery's door. They were only hurting themselves, and over time their blows grew weaker, and they steadily looked more exhausted. The men grimaced up at the monastery as if seeing some kind of uncanny, oh my god! Uncanny monster then eventually retreated one by one. It appears that the barrier is functioning as intended, Ferdinand murmured, looking like a scientist analyzing test results as he wrote some notes on a wooden board. I suppose we could reduce its strength a little. But that idea terrified me. I don't think so. The barrier's staying as is, and don't change it without telling me. Now, we need to go make sure everyone is safe, I said, but Ferdinand instantly shut me down without even looking up from his board. One wrong move now, and the mayor may be eliminated like Wolf was, he said quietly. I froze mid-step, having already started leaving the room. Wolf was the former head of the Ink Guild who had one day died out of nowhere, and while I tended to forget he ever existed, due to having never met him, his death served as a concrete example of how little nobles follow commoners. Wolf had underground connections with nobles, and it had been silenced by being murdered the moment Ferdinand and Karstedt started investigating him. And here Ferdinand was, warning me that the mayor could be murdered just as spontaneously if we moved as openly as we had before. I was sure that I understood how little nobles cared for the lives of commoners now, but hearing Ferdinand say it outright made my heart skip a beat. Haas's mayor was no friend of mine, but I didn't want him dead or anything. At the very least, I would feel guilty if my actions led to him being killed. Right. Lives are important, after all. Indeed, I would like to capture him alive, as I imagine there is much he can offer us in the way of evidence, Ferdinand said. It seemed that it wasn't the mayor's life he cared about, but rather the information he could provide. That kind of thinking made Ferdinand perfectly suited in politics, in my opinion. He wasn't constantly moved by emotions like I was, nor would he mess things up by going crazy over books like I did. We were different on a fundamental level, and that just made me sigh. No matter how hard I tried to act like a noble, I would never fully become one myself. At the end of the day, I was just a commoner in fancy clothes. You will wait until the scheduled day to visit them. I imagine this has taught you that they will be safe from attackers inside. There were 3 whole days before my next scheduled visit, and while I was more than a little impatient, I wasn't going to let them go to waste. I had Wilma determine what the orphanage would need for the winter preparations, and asked Fran to work out what my chambers would need. Meanwhile, Gil and Lutz determined how much handiwork would be done based on how much we had managed to do last year, then ordered the proper number of wooden boards from Ingo and the appropriate amount of ink from the ink workshop. I had received an ordonnance from Riarda instructing me to visit the castle so that I could have my winter clothing prepared, and Benno sent word that he wanted the chefs back to open the Italian restaurant. He also expressed his enthusiasm for me to sell my salting out technique to the wax guild since he wanted to use the animal fat candles that didn't stink from last year. In the midst of all that, Monica came to my chambers from the orphanage with a bundle wrapped in cloth. A guard at the gate leading to the lower city had apparently been handed a letter, and it was a standard practice for those in the orphanage to take such deliveries to the temple's noble section for them. But despite calling it a letter, what Monica actually had was a wooden board. I thought she was carrying a baby, for example. Like, what the heck? Who's living on the babies? Lady Rosemine, the sender, said that they knew the former High Bishop was no longer in the temple, but asked for this to be delivered to him anyway. The gate guard didn't know what to do with the letter addressed to the deceased, so I thought I would bring it straight to you. Yes, this is the first letter we've been sent specifically addressed to the former High Bishop. As the current High Bishop, I would sometimes get letters of introduction from those requesting favors. These were usually sent by farmers and merchants heading for Ehrenfest market, so it was rare for us to get a letter right after the market had ended. And while we had received several letters addressed to the current High Bishop, this was the first to be specifically addressed to the former one. Perhaps news that the High Bishop had changed was spreading outside the city as well? Only someone who knew that the High Bishop had changed but didn't know the old High Bishop had died would send a letter like this. That ruled out those in the nobles' quarter, but outside the city there was probably only a few who knew about his death. Shall we send a letter to his family in the nobles' quarter? Monica asked. I slowly shook my head. That might have been ideal under normal circumstances. But the former High Bishop didn't have anyone for the letter to go to. His older sister, the mother of the Archduke, was locked up with no outside communication permitted, and while the former High Bishop still had family on his father's side, the head of the house had changed, and they weren't on good terms either. In fact, the current head had declared that Besenwatz was unbaptized and not a member of their family in any capacity. According to Ferdinand, anyway. I think our only option is to handle the letter ourselves. We shall do what we always do. Please inform the messenger to come again tomorrow for a response. As you wish, Monica said before leaving the room. Once she was gone, I unwrapped the cloth so that I could look over the letter. That is, the wooden board. The writing was scrawled out in shaky letters that made it clear the sender wasn't a very experienced writer. Surprisingly enough... Oh! Here we go! Here we go, guys! This could be interesting. It was the mayor of Haas himself. As Ferdinand had guessed, the mayor didn't know that Besenwatz was already dead. His letter listed off complaint after complaint. Do something about the monastery. Your subordinates are being despots. They stole the orphans I was contracted to sell to Lord Contina, the scholar. I had known the mayor was a small fry, but this was honestly so pathetic that I found myself at a total loss for words. All I could do was sigh. Fran, let us visit Ferdinand. At that, we went to see Ferdinand, with me carrying the board that served as crucial evidence of the mayor's noble connections. Ferdinand, this letter arrived today. How shall we reply? I asked, handing him the board. He glared at the poorly scribbled letters as he read, then made the same exhausted expression I had. We need only reply that the former High Bishop has died. What we do from there depends on how he reacts. Assuming he does not move against us, we might find it best to let him fester. He likely wields no power that could threaten us, Ferdinand said, deciding to base his final decision on the mayor's future behavior and what might happen at Spring Prayer. Spring Prayer? Not the Harvest Festival? Cities built on agriculture depend on divine protection for a healthy harvest. They might manage to scrape by for a few years without it, but the land would steadily become more barren. Will he prioritize relations with the High Bishop, who can help his city, or earning small change from corrupted nobles? The choice is his, Ferdinand said, waving his hand dismissively. Should he choose poorly, the farmers and citizens who consequently lose their harvest shall rise up and remove him on their own. More importantly, I see that he has gone out of his way to name his noble ally. I suggest we investigate him first. Good luck with that, I said, leaving the board with Ferdinand and returning to my chambers to write a response to Haas's mayor. Or rather, I wrote one under Fran's supervision. He made sure to explain using all the usual noble euphemisms that the former High Bishop was dead, and that the mayor would have to decide in what direction to take his life now. I just hoped he would be able to parse the language. I want to continue! A new task and winter preparations. I gave my reply to Haas's messenger. The city was only half a day away, so it was likely that the mayor would read it before I returned to the monastery the day after tomorrow. I was hoping he would understand the situation and settle down, but how he was actually going to react was anyone's guess. Oh, it could be anyway. Ferdinand, is it truly wise to leave him be? I asked. As it stands, we have no better option. It would be easy enough to eliminate him, but we must consider what would follow, Ferdinand explained. As nobles, we could quite easily use our authority to arrest a mere commoner mayor and literally have his head roll. Yeah, considering he tried to go against you guys. Hello! But considering the state that Haas was in, it would be unreasonable for us to execute the mayor and do nothing else. But still, isn't it best to eliminate an evil villain like him as soon as possible? Rosamund, why do you refer to him as evil? Well, he's selling orphans, bribing scholars, and seems to have been exploiting the old High Bishop's power. That seems like a lot of bad stuff, I said, counting each raisin off on my fingers. But Ferdinand simply raised an eyebrow in surprise. None of those are particularly bad, and they are certainly not evil, he replied, catching me completely off guard. I blinked in surprise, trying to understand what I had just heard, and we both looked at each other in confusion. The mayor earns the right of ownership over the orphans by taking care of them. So whether he sells them or not is entirely up to him, Ferdinand continued, and giving nobles money and gifts to earn their favor is just a matter of course. Do you not remember Benno giving me gifts when we first met? It is only natural to use what you have to secure good relations. Orphans were literally owned by those who looked after him, and it was so normal to bribe nobles that it didn't even count as something bad. I cradled my head, taken aback by this huge contrast in what we saw as common sense. Wait, so what did the mayor do wrong? Oh well, what else but disobeying our orders and standing up unpermitted to protest our decision, Ferdinand replied. According to him, selling orphans and exhibiting a certain degree of corruption was fine as long as it benefited the city. In fact, doing those things made him even made him a good mayor. The people of Haas would put their full support behind him if the money made from selling the orphans helped the city. If they used it to help the city. Haas totals 1,000 people when the neighboring farming towns gathered to stay in its winter mansion. and it is only natural that they would be prioritized above a certain number of orphans. If we use our power to destroy a mayor battling to protect his city, we will earn the ire of all the townfolk, Ferdinand said. My heart thumped painfully. I never thought about it that way before. So we're the bad guys from Haas's perspective. At the moment, yes. We took the orphans they were planning to sell the nobles by force, put them in a monastery that the townspeople cannot enter, and are prioritizing those orphans over the tax-paying citizens, he explained. Never in the world had I expected that saving orphans from being sold into slavery will be perceived as wrong by others. I stood there shocked as Ferdinand continued with an unfazed expression. Unlike before, when you earned all your own money as an apprentice balloon shrine maiden, you are now living off the taxes of your citizens as a daughter of the Archduke. Is it any wonder why you might be expected to prioritize taking care of those taxpayers over orphans? Since I needed individuals without jobs to start working for the new printing industry, the temple's orphanage had been very convenient for me. That was why I was planning to spread the industry by building new orphanages across the duchy, and presumably why the Archduke had given me his permission to do so. But never did I consider that I would be actively harming the lives of normal citizens. The Archduke gave me permission to do this because he determined that by giving official work to orphans previously outside of the labor pool, you would be increasing the number of tax-paying citizens to draw wealth from. He was not simply acting out of compassion, Ferdinand said. A chill ran down my spine. I was being forced to confront the flaws in my narrow-minded worldview and carefree attitude. It felt like another fundamental part of me was being torn apart and forced to change, which kind of made me want to cry. I did not expect that we would have to such fundamentally different understandings of evil, Ferdinand said. This insect will no doubt prove to be a productive learning experience for you. I hereby instruct you to create an opposing faction to the mayor, expand it, and then isolate him politically. Excuse me? I am telling you to produce a successor to the mayor so that Haas may continue to function without him. If you can acquire an obedient pawn who will obey our every whim, eliminating the current mayor will cause no problems whatsoever. Do your best. Given that we will almost certainly be executing him regardless, we may as well exploit him to our fullest while we still can. So essentially, he wants her to pick someone to be the new mayor once they get rid of the old mayor for disobeying them. Ferdinand spoke casually, but I was overcome with terror. My teeth were chattering in genuine fear as I contemplated the task I had just been given, plotting to destroy the life of another person. I may have gone nuts over books in the past and taken actions that ultimately put a huge burden on others, but I had never actively schemed against someone before. I had been raised to believe that such actions were wrong and that they were something I must never do. I'm scared. I don't want to do this. I can't do this. No way. I shook my head, trembling as I shrunk back in fear, but Ferdinand just gave my head a light click, as though trying to console a self-centered child. Rosamine, if you do not handle this situation properly, the orphans in a monastery will not be able to go to the forest. That will prevent them from working in the workshop and ultimately lead to them becoming burdens who can do nothing more than consume divine gifts. They will be ostracized not only by Haas, but by the others in the orphanage as well. You do not wish to steal them away from their home, only to put them in a place where they will be shunned by all, do you? But I don't know how to plot and deceive people. I protested as best I could, but Ferdinand God damn it, just knelt down to make eye contact with me. There is a first time for everything. I shall teach you how, he said, breaking into a smile so poisonally sweet that I could feel the venom flowing into me. It was a sensation that made me tense up and grit my teeth. Oh, this could be interesting, guys. Let's see how she does with this. That night, I was so stricken by Ferdinand's poison that I could hardly sleep. And when it came time to go to the castle the next day, my exhaustion was weighing me down just as much as the fear was. I needed to be measured soon so that the clothes could be ordered and finished before winter, and it was so urgent that Riarda had sent me 3 separate ordinands yesterday. Ferdinand had caved under her pressure, so ultimately I was going to be dragged to the castle against my will. I felt so sick that I just wanted to rest, but they weren't going to let that happen. Curse Ferdinand and his brutally high standards. While I was there, I planned to retrieve Hugo as well. I couldn't foresee there being any issues with that since it was past the date we had agreed on anyway. Yeah, we shall be going to the castle today. Inform Lutz that I will be returning with Hugo. As you wish, we will have the picture books finished soon, so please cheer up. Thank you, Gil. I hope that you continue growing up to be a good, honest person. Gil's innocent, sincere smile healed my heart. It couldn't have been more different from the fake, poisonous smile of a certain someone. All of my attendants really were so cute. Rosamine, is something wrong? You do not look well, Ferdinand said. You're the reason why she don't look well, dude! I I didn't get any sleep because I was up all night agonizing over the fact that I have to plot someone's downfall. And whose fault do you think that is? I added on the inside, fixing Ferdinand with a glare as he blinked in surprise. With such a frail heart, you will never survive as the Archduke's daughter. Am I wrong? This might be a beginner-level task to you, Ferdinand, but to me, it's one of the toughest problems I've faced. I don't think I'll ever sleep again by the time I finish this. Something this trivial would give you insomnia? You truly are weak, Rosemine. I knew that I was weak, both physically and psychologically, so I simply nodded. Ferdinand let out a sigh, then lowered his eyes and thought for a moment. I suppose there is no point thinking about this now. Let us depart. I headed to the castle, and my panda bus now used as a slight smirk on Norbert's face whenever he came out to greet us. I shall inform the Ob about the chefs, so that you will be too busy to do so yourself, Ferdinand said, blatantly lying with a self-assured smile on his face before flourishing his cape and striding off. He was definitely just running away from Riarda. Of course. Lady Rosemine, welcome home. The seamstresses are already here, Riarda said when I arrived, rushing me to meet them in the parlor. The room was filled with piles of warm-looking cloth, plus a bunch of extravagant furs. This was my first time getting to pick the materials for my clothes, and while I knew I should have been excited about that, my mood didn't improve in the least. This will be both your and Lord Wilford's first time participating in winter socializing. We must carefully consider what you're going to wear, she said, clearly enthusiastic to be involved in dressing a girl after years of dressing exclusively boys. She had apparently already ordered several winter outfits for me alongside Elvira and Florencia. We ordered them to match your summer measurements, but children grow fast, so we will be wanting your newer measurements. Well, I don't grow very much, but sure. Ferdinand's theory was that my need to keep my body filled with mana at all times was making it hard for me to grow. I wanted to believe that I had grown at least a little lately since I had been eating a lot more and never had any opportunities to use my mana. And the measurements showed that I had in fact grown a little, though it was barely anything compared to other kids my age. What kind of outfit would you like, milady? This is one that Lord Wilford's going to wear. I suggest you get something that looks just like it, Riarda said, showing me a wooden board with the design for one of Wilford's outfits drawn on it, as she pointed out various colors and types of cloth. I know it was heartwarming to see a brother and sister in matching outfits, but I didn't feel too enthusiastic about being in that situation myself. Regardless, it appears that Riarda had already emotionally settled on the color and cloth. All that was left was the design, which she had also narrowed down to a few candidates. Lady Rosemine, which of these do you prefer, she asked. I really didn't care too much about clothes myself, and would be fine with pretty much anything that made other people happy as long as it wasn't embarrassing for me to wear. I would like this one, please, I said, pointing to one at random. I had assumed that would settle the matter, but Riarda wouldn't let me go unless I also ordered a set of underclothes and shoes to go along with it. With nothing else to lose, I took this opportunity to also order some clothes and carpets to make life in the temple easier. That would be a big help since getting clothes for winter last year had been such a arduous task. Riarda, I must be going soon to discuss the chefs with Sylvester. The chefs you brought with you have been enormously popular in the castle, milady. I am told that despite everyone wanting to know the recipes, Sylvester's lips are remaining as tight as can be. It seemed that Hugo was steadily getting more popular in the castle. I smiled as Riarda complained about him not letting everyone share the delicious food, feeling a bit proud. Sylvester used his own money to buy the recipes. It's no surprise that he wouldn't teach them to eat others so readily. I imagine he wants to surprise the nobles during winter. Lord Sylvester invited me for lunch one day, and I could hardly believe what I was tasting. Seems like I have a bright winter to look forward to, Riarda replied. Well, I'll be taking that chef home with me today. Sorry! I apologized to Riarda internally before asking her to set up a meeting with Sylvester for me. I imagine that will be difficult on such short notice. Lord Ferdinand has surely made arrangements for me. Perhaps try asking Sylvester. As you wish, milady. It may be some time before I return. I cannot talk today, guys! Please read this in the meantime, if you would. Riarda took out a book and set it down in front of me. I could feel a beaming smile instantly spread across my face. All of my doom and gloom was being pushed out of sight and mind as the joy of reading washed over me. Thank you, Riarda. Be a good girl and wait for me now. I responded with a nod and a smile before picking up the book and immediately starting to read. It was a book about magic that Ferdinand had prepared for me, containing descriptions of face stone colors and how they related to the gods. It seems that the colors were connected to the divine colors of the gods, and particular colored face stones work better with certain types of magic. For example, it said that when using magic related to the goddess of water, or her subordinates, it was most mana efficient to use green face stones. It was a relatively easy book for me to read since I already knew the names of the gods and their relationships from the Bible, but given that all of the Eternal Five and their subordinates were being mentioned at once, I can imagine that someone who started learning with this book would get lost almost immediately. It was probably meant for adults. The phrasing was complex at times, and the sentences were often long and winding. On top of all that, the writing style itself was antiquated and hard to read, using lots of older words. There were illustrations here and there, but they didn't have anything to do with the book's content, so I got the feeling they didn't really matter. If a book like this is being used to teach nobles essential information, then I feel like this picture book I'm making will actually be in high demand, I thought, continuing to read the book with newfound confidence and getting a ton of winter sales. At some point, Riarda tapped my shoulder and informed me that a meeting had been arranged for tea time at Fifth Bell. I decided to continue reading in the meantime. In all honesty, I would much rather skip the meeting entirely and save my book. When Fifth Bell rang, I started making my way to the front of the castle's main building where Sylvester's office was. Wilfred approached us along the way, having seemingly been caught by Lamprey partway through one of his usual escape attempts. "Rosemine, I didn't know you were back at the castle." "Good day to you, Wilfred. Where are you going?" "A fine question. Yes, a fine question indeed," I said, deliberately trying to avoid answering Wilfred. Already thought it was unfair that I only got to speak with Sylvester, so I didn't want to say that I was on my way to have tea with him. But Riarda answered for me. "We are going to the break room on the main building's second floor, Wilfred. Why does Father only ever give you any attention?" Wilfred grumbled, biting his lip and glaring at me with anger in his eyes. "You know, fair, you dummy! I hate you, Rosemine!" I normally would have kept a blank expression and ignored him, but I was so emotionally troubled by the task Ferdinand had given me that I couldn't let Wilfred's whining slide this time. Him skipping out on his studies and doing whatever he wanted reminded me of my early days as mine when I only cared about myself, which was annoying enough on its own without him insulting me too. "You are the dummy here, Wilfred. You have the opportunity to freely read books, and yet you spend that time running away from your studies and being a burden to all those around you. How is it unfair that Sylvester is treating me differently? You are only getting what you deserve. Now hurry up and learn to read already, if you would be so kind. I am waiting ever so impatiently for the opportunity to study, and you are denying me that. If you weren't years behind in learning to read, I would be studying right now instead of getting blood on my hands for Ferdinand." The last part wasn't Wilfred's fault at all, but I was so mad I had to say it. I didn't want to hear him complaining at me ever again. Wilfred widened his deep green eyes and looked at me in total shock, having never dreamed that I would talk back to him. His guard Lamprey was looking equally wide-eyed, and Riarda was blinking rapidly. "What gives you the right to talk to me like that?" Wilfred stammered. "Please remember that you are a coward who spent his time fleeing from the work expected of him as the Archduke's son. If you don't want me pointing at your failures, then I would suggest you dedicate yourself to improving as a person." I was especially angry because things were getting worse for me by the day, while Wilfred just pranced about doing whatever he wanted, despite also being one of the Archduke's children. I wanted to yell at him to try doing what Ferdinand had just told me to do. "Lady Rosemine, please contain yourself," Daniel shouted, shaking me by the shoulders and bringing me back to my senses. It seemed that in my anger, I had crushed Wilfred a little. Oopsie! Oopsie! "Rosemine, you need to be careful." "Oh, Ferdinand's not going to like that." Leaving now would probably be for the best. It wasn't a good idea for us to stay face to face. As I'm busy with a mountain of work, I will be taking my leave now. I turned on my heel and walked off, which was fine, but the Archduke's castle was needlessly big, and the distance between my room and Sylvester's office was absurd. Due in part to my lack of sleep, I ended up getting out of breath along the way. Cornelius' face clouded over as he saw my walking pace slow down. "Riarda, take Lady Rosemine doesn't seem to be feeling well," he said. Cornelius always called me Lady Rosemine regarding me as a knight in the Archduke's castle, but his expression was that of a worried older brother. Riarda peered at my face, then picked me up and resumed walking. That wasn't good. Now my head was spinning. "Milady, please take care not to pass out before the meeting. Sorry, things would be a lot easier if I could just drive a small panda bus to the castle. Why, I say we suggest that to Lord Sylvester." When we arrived at the break room, tea had already started. Sylvester was drinking alongside his retainers and Ferdinand. "You're late, Rosemine," he said. "This room is so far from here that she almost collapsed along the way. May I suggest that you give permission to ride her high in the castle?" Riarda requested on my behalf. Sylvester crossed his arms and thought. "Won't the wings hit the walls and all that? My lady's high beast has no wings. If she can change its size at will, it won't be a bother to anyone." At that, Sylvester's green eyes shone with curiosity. "Let me see it. I've never seen a high beast with wings before. If it looks funny enough, I'll give her permission." "Sylvester, you are a silly person." "Okay, I would be riding him alone in the castle, so he would be about this big," I said, taking out my face gun and making a single-person-sized panda bus. And since that single person was me, he was about as small as a rideable children's toy. I got inside and drove around the room at a walking pace. "That's a high beast. The heck is that?" "Now that's funny. I'd expect nothing less from you, Rosemine. You always think of stuff nobody else can." Sylvester choked out, guffawing with laughter as he pointed at Leslie. "All right, I'll keep my promise. Feel free to use it all throughout the castle." No, Sylvester," Ferdinand exclaimed. "What, Ferdinand? Better this than having attendants and knights carry her around at all times, right?" "I mean, yeah." With the Archduke on my side, I had nothing to fear. I let out a sigh of relief, having been permitted to use Leslie in the castle and its estates, and took my seat. As I sipped my tea, Sylvester glanced my way. So, what did you want to talk about? I imagine Ferdinand has already informed you, but I'm here to take Hugo back, I said. Sylvester shot his head to the side to look at Ferdinand. You didn't mention this, Ferdinand. Wait, really? What in the world did he talk to you about, then? There are more pressing matters than the chefs, and Sylvester, you should know that this lending period that was agreed upon is now over. There should be no issue with her taking him home, Ferdinand said, tapping a finger against his temple. While that was true for me, it seems Sylvester did in fact have several problems with that. No way, the food's finally getting real good. Let him stay a bit longer. No, I can't give you any more time. We won't be able to open the Italian restaurant without him. As Sylvester and I glared at each other, Ferdinand waved his hand. Summon the chef, we can let him decide. That might have been a reasonable idea, if not for the fact that no commoner chef would be able to defy the Archduke's orders. Hugo wouldn't be able to speak his mind at all. That was no doubt why he had a stony expression on his paling face when he was brought into the room. Chefs were commoner servants and would normally never visit a noble's room like this. And as one could tell from Fran disliking the idea of me teaching Ella recipes directly, it was rare for commoners to leave the ground floor. You have served me well, Sylvester said to the kneeling Hugo, who was facing the floor in a way that hid his expression from view. What would you say to me offering you a job at the castle? I will be glad to have you as a court chef. My lord, Hugo began, hesitantly trailing off rather than jumping for joy, a clear sign that he wanted to refuse. Sylvester, we are just borrowing Hugo from the Gilberta Company, and it is absolutely necessary that we return him to them. Once he has returned, you will be free to invite him back as much as you please. Hopefully you will give him time to train a successor first, but either way, please do not try to steal him away here and now, I said. While still wearing his serious Archduke expression, Sylvester gave a light shrug. What a shame. I'll have to visit that eatery again sometime then. I shall await your patronage, my lord, Hugo said reverently. I decided to take Hugo to the carriages that were leaving the castle, and so exited the room after we had said our farewells to the Archduke. As soon as we were out in the hall, Hugo let out a quiet sigh. Thank you, Lady Rosamine. I have a partner I wish to wed, and it would have been problematic for me to become a court chef so suddenly. Hugo had been throwing towels along with the other single people back at last year's Star Festival, but it seemed he had finally found a girl of his own. That explained why he wanted to go back to the lower city so much. There weren't any easy methods for commoners to pass messages between the lower city and the nobles' quarter, so it would have been even harder than a normal long-distance relationship. So, will you move to the nobles' quarter once you get married, Hugo? It depends on her, but if the stars align, I would like to be a court chef after the next Star Festival, Hugo murmured with a grin. Okay, I think I'm going to end that off here. I'll see everybody next time.